It was the kind of night that makes you want to disappear under a blanket and never come out again. The world outside felt almost unlivable. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming, howling through the narrow streets like some invisible beast trying to tear the city apart. Snow didn't fall gently, it attacked in thick sheets, stinging my skin like tiny shards of glass. Every breath I took felt like inhaling knives, burning my lungs with icy fire. My fingers, even stuffed deep inside my pockets, felt like they were slowly turning to stone. It was late, too late for anyone to be out unless they had no choice. I was one of those people. Work had kept me later than usual, and now all I wanted was the warmth of my small apartment and the comfort of a hot drink. My head was bent against the wind, shoulders hunched, boots crunching against a thin crust of ice beneath the fresh snow. My mind wasn't on anything but getting home, and then, I heard it first. I thought I'd imagined it. Just a faint sound carried on the wind, so soft it could have been nothing more than the groan of a loose shutter or the creak of a tree branch in the storm. I kept walking, telling myself it was nothing. But then it came again. A cry, not loud, but enough to cut through the storm and into my chest. It was different this time, shaky, uneven, laced with something that made my heart squeeze. Desperation. I stopped in my tracks. The street was empty, the snow swirling so thick I could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. My ears strained, searching for the sound again. There, to my right, carried faintly over the wind. I hesitated for only a second before my feet moved on their own. I turned down a narrow side street, darker than the main road, the kind of place you normally wouldn't want to walk through at night. My boots crunched louder now on the frozen ground, echoing in the quiet gaps between gusts of wind. The cry came again, closer this time. I followed it, weaving between parked cars half buried in snow, stepping over icy puddles that crunched and cracked beneath my weight. My breath came out in heavy clouds, mingling with the white curtain of falling snow, and then I saw her. At first. She was just a small shape in the shadows, huddled against a wall like a discarded bundle of clothes. But as I got closer, the details sharpened, and my stomach dropped. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She sat directly on the frozen pavement, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her coat was ripped down one side, offering almost no protection against the storm. Her lips were an alarming shade of blue, and her cheeks were so pale they almost blended into the snowflakes collecting on her face. Her tiny hands clutched something pressed against her chest, a small, ragged stuffed bunny, its fur matted and ears limp. Her hair was tangled, stiff in places where the snow had already started to freeze in. She was shivering so violently it looked painful, every breath a shallow gasp that puffed weakly into the air. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't the kind of shiver you get from being a little cold, this was the dangerous, body shutting down kind of cold. I'd read about hypothermia before, but seeing it in front of me like this, it was different. It was terrifying. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, are you okay?" Her head lifted slowly, and for the first time, I saw her eyes, wide, glassy, and filled with something between fear and exhaustion. She didn't answer. Her teeth were chattering so hard that even if she wanted to speak, I don't think she could. I took a step closer, careful not to scare her. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. We need to get you out of the cold." She just blinked at me, her arms tightening around the stuffed bunny as if it was the only thing she trusted in the world. The wind roared again, and I could feel the snow soaking through my coat, numbing my own skin. I couldn't imagine what she must have been feeling. In that moment, all thoughts of my warm apartment vanished. The only thing that mattered was getting this little girl to safety, fast. I didn't hesitate. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I closed the distance between us in a few quick strides and dropped to my knees on the icy pavement. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you okay?" I asked, my voice louder now, desperate to break through whatever fog she was in. Her head tilted slightly toward me, and her eyes fluttered open, revealing a glassy, faraway stare. She didn't speak, Her teeth were chattering so violently that her jaw trembled uncontrollably. It was the kind of shiver that wasn't just from being cold, it was from being too cold, the kind that comes right before the body stops trying to warm itself altogether. I noticed she was clutching something tight to her chest, a thin, worn-out stuffed bunny. Its fur was patchy, its ears drooped, and the seams along its side were splitting. But the way she gripped it told me everything I needed to know. It was her comfort, maybe the only thing familiar to her in this moment of terror. Her tiny hands trembled around it, pale fingers stiff from the cold. I could almost feel the chill radiating off her. I'd read once that when someone is close to hypothermia, their skin can feel like ice to the touch. Seeing her like this, I knew she didn't have much time. I didn't stop to think. There wasn't time to weigh options or wonder what was going on. I pulled off my scarf, thick, woolen, still holding a little bit of my body heat, and wrapped it around her as gently as I could. "I've got you," I murmured, even though I didn't know if she could hear me. I slid my arms under her and lifted her off the ground. My breath caught in my throat at how light she was, so light, it felt wrong. Like I wasn't lifting a child but a bundle of hollow sticks wrapped in fabric. She was fragile in a way that made me terrified I could hurt her just by holding her too tightly. Her cheek brushed against my shoulder, and I nearly flinched. Her skin was icy, far colder than I expected. It wasn't just the night air, this was the kind of cold that seeps deep into a person, the kind that can stop a heart if it lingers too long. The thought sent a rush of urgency through me. I knew I couldn't waste a second. The nearest cafe I could think of was just a block away, but in this storm, it might as well have been a mile. The snow whipped into my face as I started running, each step crunching through layers of ice and slush. My arms tightened protectively around her, shielding her as much as I could from the biting wind. Her small body shifted slightly in my grasp, and I could feel a faint tremor run through her, not the steady rhythm of shivering, but an uneven twitch, like her muscles were too weak to keep up the fight. "Hang on," I whispered, my own breath coming in sharp bursts from the cold and the effort. Just a little longer. Finally, the cafe came into view, its windows fogged with warmth, a golden glow spilling onto the snow outside. I pushed through the door with my shoulder, and the moment we stepped inside, a rush of heat enveloped us. The sudden change in temperature was overwhelming. My glasses fogged instantly, and my skin prickled from the contrast between freezing air and the cafe's cozy warmth. A few customers turned toward us, their conversations halting as they took in the sight of the girl in my arms. "She needs help," I called out, my voice louder than I intended, edged with panic. Within seconds, two people jumped into action. One of the staff members grabbed a thick blanket from behind the counter and rushed it over, while another customer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, set down her coffee and hurried to make a cup of hot chocolate. I found an empty chair and sat her down gently, keeping the scarf wrapped around her as the cafe worker draped the blanket over her shoulders. I began rubbing her small, frozen hands between mine, trying to coax warmth back into them. Her fingers felt stiff, almost wooden. And I worried about how far the cold had already crept. The woman returned with the hot chocolate, steam curling up from the cup. I held it to the girl's lips, encouraging her to take a sip. At first, she didn't respond, but then, slowly, she took a small mouthful. The warmth seemed to jolt something awake in her, and her shivering grew slightly more controlled. Minutes passed like hours as I kept working to warm her. I watched closely as a faint pink began to creep back into her cheeks, her eyes blinking more steadily now. Relief washed over me, but I knew we weren't out of danger yet. Once the color had started to return to her cheeks and her shivering had eased, I crouched down so my face was level with hers. I kept my voice gentle, careful not to overwhelm her. "Where's your mom or dad? Do you know where you live?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment. Her big, brown eyes seemed far too old for her small face, eyes that had seen things no child should ever have to see. Slowly, those eyes began to glisten, and her lower lip trembled. A tear slid down her cheek. Then another. She shook her head, not a frantic, scared shake, but a small, almost defeated one. Like she either didn't know the answers, or couldn't bring herself to say them. I wanted to ask more, but something in her expression told me pushing her right now would only make things worse. She clutched her stuffed bunny tighter, pulling it close to her chin as if it could protect her from the questions. The cafe owner, who had been watching quietly from behind the counter, picked up the phone. I overheard him speaking in a low voice. Yes, she's here. About 7 years old. No, she's not speaking much. Yes, she's safe for now. It took only a few minutes for the police to arrive, though in that short time I kept catching myself glancing at the door, afraid she might bolt or that something, or someone, might come looking for her. The bell above the door jingled sharply, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air with them. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face serious but calm. The other, a woman with kind eyes, approached slowly, as if not to startle the girl. They listened. As I explained everything, how I'd found her, the state she was in, what little she'd done or said. The woman officer crouched down beside her, speaking softly, introducing herself, but the girl didn't respond. She just held on to that bunny and kept her eyes fixed on the floor. The male officer made some notes, then glanced at me. You did the right thing, getting her out of the cold. You might have saved her life. I nodded, but the weight of the situation was starting to settle on me. This wasn't just a lost child who had wandered a little too far from home, this was something else. Something worse. After a few quiet moments, the female officer extended her hand toward the girl. We're going to take you somewhere warm and safe, okay? The girl hesitated, then slowly placed her tiny hand in the officer's. She rose to her feet, still holding the bunny in her other arm, and allowed herself to be guided toward the door. But just before stepping outside, she stopped. Her head turned, and her eyes found mine. For a moment, it was as if the room had gone silent. She walked back toward me, the officer pausing in surprise. Then she reached out her small hand and gripped my sleeve. It wasn't a long touch, just a second or two, but in that moment, it was as if she was trying to tell me something without words. Maybe it was, thank you. Maybe it was, don't let me go. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Her hand slipped away, and the officer gently led her out into the night. The door closed, the bell jingled again, and the cafe seemed suddenly too quiet. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting. The blanket was still draped over the chair, and a faint warmth still lingered where she had been. I didn't even realize my hands were trembling until I reached for my coat. Walking home that night, the snow felt different, heavier somehow. Like the weight of the situation had settled into the air around me. But there was also a strange sense of relief in my chest. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what had happened to her before I found her. But she was alive. She was safe or at least, that's what I told myself because somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, unsettling voice the next morning started like any other, at least for the first few minutes. I was making coffee, the smell slowly filling my small kitchen, when my phone rang. The caller ID made my pulse quicken. It was the local police department. Hello? I answered. Is this the person who found the little girl last night? A familiar male voice asked. It was one of the officers I'd spoken to in the cafe. Yes, that's me, I said, already feeling that something wasn't right. His tone shifted, heavy and deliberate. We need to ask you a few more questions. Could you come down to the station? The way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't casual. It wasn't routine. There was urgency in his voice, and something else I couldn't quite place. Confused and uneasy, I agreed. The walk to the station felt longer than usual, even though it was only a few blocks away. The snow from last night was still piled high along the sidewalks, crunching under my boots. I caught myself replaying the events of the night before in my head, wondering if I had missed something important. When I arrived, the same officer from the cafe greeted me in the lobby. He didn't waste time with small talk. He simply gestured for me to follow him into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a bulletin board on the wall. Then he handed me a sheet of paper. It was a missing persons poster. My eyes went straight to the photograph in the center, and my stomach dropped. It was her. The little girl from last night. But then my gaze fell to the date beneath the word missing, and my breath caught. She had been reported missing 3 years ago. 3 years. She's been gone that long? I asked, my voice barely more. Then a whisper. The officer nodded gravely. Her name is Emily. She was abducted when she was 4 years old. The case has been open ever since. We never stopped looking, but there hadn't been any solid leads, until last night. I sank into the chair, my mind struggling to process the gap between the fragile child I'd carried through the snow and the horrifying reality of her disappearance. The officer continued, his voice calm but steady. We believe she's been living with someone who posed as her relative. He kept her out of sight, never allowed her to play outside alone, never enrolled her in school. She was isolated. That's probably why she didn't talk much to you or to us. She hasn't been in a normal environment for years. Asterisk I swallowed hard, an image forming in my mind of that small, silent apartment where she must have spent most of her days. No playgrounds. No friends. No real freedom. Asterisk the officer leaned forward. The night you found her, it was the first time she had ever been outside alone in all those years. We don't know exactly how she got away, but it may have been her only chance. If you hadn't found her when you did, he trailed off, letting the thought hang in the air. Asterisk I didn't need him to finish the sentence. The cold had been brutal. Last night. I knew what could have happened, asterisk, but then he said something that made my chest tighten, asterisk. The man who was keeping her, he said slowly, lives just 2 streets away from you. Asterisk I stared at him, stunned. 2 streets? Asterisk, yes. You've probably passed him dozens of times without realizing it. Maybe in the grocery store, maybe just walking down the street. And all the while, his voice grew quieter. She was there. Hidden in plain sight. Asterisk a chill ran through me, not the kind the winter wind brings, but the deep, unsettling kind that seeps into your bones. I thought back to all the ordinary days I'd gone about my life, completely unaware that a child in desperate need of help was practically my neighbor. Asterisk the officer assured me they were moving quickly. We have a team watching the property now. We'll bring him in soon. Your role in this, you should know, it made a difference. You changed the outcome. Asterisk I nodded, but my mind wasn't on his words. It was on the reality that evil can exist. Right beside you, hidden behind closed curtains, while life goes on around it. The news came faster than I expected. Later that same day, the police called to tell me they had found him, the man who had been keeping Emily. He was arrested without incident. Asterisk they didn't share all the details, but I didn't need to hear them to know the truth. That little girl's nightmare was over, asterisk, but the part that stuck with me most was what came next, asterisk. Her parents had been contacted immediately. They had never given up. For 3 long years, they had lived every parent's worst nightmare, printing flyers, following false leads, staying up late at night wondering where she was, if she was safe, if she was even still alive, asterisk. Now, they had her back, asterisk. A few hours later, I got another call. This time, it wasn't from the police, it was from her parents themselves. Their voices trembled with emotion as they asked if I could come by the station. They wanted to meet me. To thank me, asterisk. When I walked into the station, I saw them before. They saw me, asterisk. Emily was in her mother's arms, her small face buried in the warmth of her shoulder. Her father stood close, one protective arm around them both, as if afraid that if he let go for even a second, she might slip away again, asterisk. And then, her mother turned and noticed me. She gasped quietly and whispered something to Emily, asterisk. The little girl turned her head, and for the first time since that freezing night, I saw her smile. It was small, a little shy, but it was real, asterisk. Her mother crossed the room and hugged me without hesitation, her tears soaking into my coat. Her father followed, shaking my hand with a grip that told me more than words ever could, asterisk. Thank you. He said, his voice thick. You brought our daughter back to us. Asterisk. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't a hero. I had just been in the right place at the right time. But standing there, watching them together, I realized something. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change someone's entire life, asterisk. We talked for a little while. I learned that Emily had always loved bunnies, that the stuffed toy she carried had been with her since she was a toddler. Her parents had given it to her on her 2nd birthday, and somehow, through everything she'd been through, she'd managed to keep it, asterisk. Eventually, it was time for me to go. I didn't want to intrude on their reunion any longer. I gave them a small wave and turned toward the door, asterisk. That's when I heard quick footsteps behind me, asterisk. I turned, and there she was, Emily, holding her stuffed bunny. She didn't say a word. Instead, she reached up, placed it into my hands, and closed my fingers around it, asterisk. I tried to give it back immediately. This is yours, I said softly, asterisk, but she shook her head, her little smile growing just a bit wider. It wasn't the smile of a child who had been rescued. It was the smile of someone who understood something deeper than most adults ever would, asterisk. She wanted me to have it, asterisk. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, accepting the gift. She stepped back, rejoining her parents, her small hand slipping into her mother's, asterisk. I left the station that day with the bunny in my coat pocket. It was small, worn, and a little tattered, but to me, it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried, asterisk. Even now, that bunny sits on my shelf at home. It's not just a toy, it's a reminder, asterisk. A reminder that sometimes, life puts you in the path of someone who needs you at exactly the right moment. A reminder that even the smallest action, stopping to follow a faint cry on a freezing night, can set off a chain of events that changes lives forever, asterisk. And most of all, it's a reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms or capes. Sometimes, they're just ordinary people who make a choice in an extraordinary moment. Whenever I see that bunny, I think about Emily. I think about the way her tiny hand gripped my sleeve that night, the way her eyes lit up when she saw her parents again, and the way she silently told me thank you without ever speaking a word. One cold, snowy night changed everything, for her family, and for me.